All right, let's bring Jackson on and let's take a solid 10, 15 minutes of questions.
Let's do it. Let's do it. First question. Aside from the superstars, who are obviously the driving force for each team, what is an X factor for each team going into game seven? It could be a player, a concept, whatever,
So the
whatever.
the obvious one is shooting, right? There's a certain amount of like whether or not we get a confident role player night for either team. That could be Dort, that could be Michael Porter Jr., that could be Christian Brown, that could be Kason Wallace and Alex Caruso. Like, there's definitely a role player swing either way. I'm going to go with Jamal versus J Dub as just shot makers. One of the things that I think we've seen a pretty good example of is like Jamal has a couple of crafty finishes in this series, especially in transition, but both teams are doing a good job of keeping specifically J Dub and Jamal from getting all the way to the rim. J Dub's having to settle for a lot of like tough stuff in the short to mid range, and so is Jamal. And so I think there's a certain amount of like shot making comfortability between those two guys that I think would be a big swing in this game seven. I also think the whistle could play a role. Is Oklahoma City allowed to just beat the shit out of Jokic, or are they going to get a little more ticky tack? Shea's whistle, that could be a big factor. Um, Oklahoma City in general, just processing against the zone and knocking down shots. I think that's a big one too. There are a lot of examples, but you know how it is, Jackson. Like this point in the series, everyone knows what everyone's doing, and it's really just about
Yeah,
guys, executing the game plan and knocking down shots.
for sure. Let's steal a game from Bill Simmons. Guess the line for game seven.
I'm gonna guess OKC minus 8.5.
7.5.
Oh,
Open at eight, though. So you
I was
almost nailed
thinking
it. That's a
seven and
good
a half, and I
guess.
was like, no, I'm gonna be more aggressive.
I was going to say more like five or
Hmm.
six. I'm kind of surprised. I'm kind of
Well, after
surprised.
OKC was a minus 4.5 favorite on the road tonight, I was like,
Yeah, fair enough.
man,
Good
like they
point.
got to be up there in that like 7 or 8 range. But yeah, I think that's the right line because the dynamic at play is it's either going to be a close game or OKC will pull away and kind of blow them out, 10, 15. Because, veteran team, once they lose sight of their opportunity to win, they'll probably, let go of the rope a little bit. Um, I do think it's going to be very low scoring, though. That would be a game that I would take the under for sure.
Hmm. This was a question about sort of something that you mentioned, which is the Thunder finding success with some of those middle drives and the baseline cutter, specifically against the zone. Can you sort of break down why that works? And also, do you think that that sort of success will result in less zone from Denver in Game Seven?
There's a way to run the zone better than they've been running it in terms of just, I mean, put it very simply, just guys containing the ball better. But think of it like this. So if you guys think about the zone in the context of each guy kind of has a job, you have your top guys and you have your guys that are in the corners, right? And then you have Jokic in the middle of the floor. And Jokic's responsibility, the middleman responsibility for basically every 2-3 zone. Although I've seen some variations, like Houston was not using Steven Adams to cover the middle. They'd use a top guy to cover the middle. You'll see a couple of weird variations around the league, but Jokic's responsibility basically is the basket and up to the elbows. He'll if a guy catches in the middle of the floor, in many cases, he's the guy who will come up, and then the two baseline guys will pinch down. But what was happening is all of those four guys on the outside were doing a poor job of one, containing the ball, and two, filling in for Jokic when he would step up. So imagine a scenario where and guys, when we go to playback later, I'll pull up some video clips of this so you guys can see some specific examples of that. But essentially, if you give up dribble penetration in the middle, Jokic has no choice but to step up. Because if he doesn't step up, he's on his heels for an athlete who's going to elevate right at the front of the rim. So he needs to step up to stop the driver before he can get into basically the zone where he can take off and make a play. And then at that point, the two bottom guys have to pinch in to rotate to the basket. And they were missing that rotation constantly. And so when that guy would just cut along the baseline, when Jokic would step up, it'd be just an easy drop off pass and there'd be an easy, dunk or a layup right underneath the basket. But theoretically, if you're in the zone, that dribble penetration is something you should be able to contain. The whole point of the zone is to force them to swing the ball around the perimeter and take threes. So like your job, like a 3-2 zone, or these other variations, a 3-2 in particular, you're trying to take away threes. And there's opportunities around the basket. But in a 2-3 zone, the entire premise of the zone is these guys are young and they don't know how to make shots under pressure in kind of a funky zone situation. So your job there is essentially to contain the ball and force them to take threes off of swing passes instead of paint touches. And they just didn't do a good job. But again, we'll get into more examples of that when we get over to playback later so you guys can see some video.
Next question. With MPJ hurt and missing most of his shots, do you think it's better for Russ, Peyton Watson, or even Strawther to eat up those minutes and sort of to focus the question a little bit? That's obviously depending on the flow of the game, who's playing better. But in a vacuum, if you had to pick someone else to be the fifth closer along with their four main guys, who would you go with?
First of all, just so that you guys know, because I pulled up the numbers, Oklahoma City, 23 possessions of zone offense, a 109 offensive rating. That's very good. 63 possessions of half court man to man, a 78 offensive rating. So obviously, I don't think we'll see zero zone in game 7, but I wouldn't be surprised if Denver ended up running more man just because of the fact that Oklahoma City had so much success against it. Now, to the question, we had a similar kind of like topic during the meat and potatoes of the start of this show, but I think this is literally the job for Adelman in Game 7. You got to be willing to make a change, but willing to throw a quick hook. This is a zero margin for error game. You cannot afford to lose this particular game. So with that being the case, you give Strawther a chance. Well, you start with Michael Porter Jr., right? And if MPJ has it going and he's getting rebounds, he's in the right spots defensively, and he's, 4 for his first 7 from the field, you push his minutes all the way up because he's been in a lot of big games in his career. He's not going to be as uncomfortable as a Julian Strawther or something along those lines. But if Michael Porter Jr. starts, 1 for 5 and has a couple sloppy turnovers and it just looks like he's not in it, and Russ is out of it, but Julian Strawther is at least in the right spots and stepping confidently into shots, you give him a shot and you ride him out in that sort of situation. But these are the kinds of games like you've got to be willing to try something, but you've got to have a quick hook for anybody who's out of it. Like if Russ comes in a late first quarter shift and starts shitting the bed, you get him the hell out of there and you get him out of there quick because this game flipped in that first quarter from being like a 10-point Denver lead to suddenly it was a neck and neck again because Russ just lost control of his decision making for like a 90-second stretch in the late first quarter. And that could be the difference between going home and advancing to the next round. So to answer the question, I don't think it's about picking a guy right now. All of those guys are inconsistent. Julian Strawther's a kid relative to NBA talent. Like he had a great game tonight, but he could just as easily go 0 for 6 with a bunch of mistakes in Game 7. Russell Westbrook, same sort of range of outcomes. Michael Porter Jr., same sort of range of outcomes. I think Peyton Watson's a much higher floor but a lower ceiling option in the sense that he's not going to do a ton for you offensively, but there's a higher floor there. And I think I'll give you a more concrete answer like this. If the shit hits the fan and everyone's playing poorly, I'd close with Watson. What do you think, Jackson? Would you close with Watson if everyone else is struggling?
I was going to say the same thing. I would close with Watson. Sort of that's my initial reaction, but especially if no one really has it going, just because his defensive ability is he's kind of a game changing defensive player. That transition block on Jalen Williams was insane when OKC was trying to make sort of regain control of it for a second there. An insane play, and he's also less. He's less likely to make a big shot, but he's less likely to make a stupid mistake on that end. Like Russ is sort of, Russ is very talented, but he's prone to mistakes. Michael Porter Jr. is prone to some bad shot selection at times. And Julian Strawther, even compared to Peyton Watson, is a child. So I think the Peyton Watson's floor is definitely, and his defensive capability is where I would lean.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
Especially in a Game 7 that's likely to be very physical, likely to be very low scoring, where you probably don't even want Michael Porter Jr. taking a shot with a minute left anyways. I don't even care if it's a hard shot. I want Jokic or Murray taking the shot anyways. So considering that's the case, it's like go with that.
I'm glad you brought this up too, because I think this is important for a mentality thing for Jokic. Like, it bothered me in Game 5 that he took that crazy fadeaway over Chet at the top of the key. And I thought it was a decent look for Michael Porter Jr. at the top of the key, but he had a
Yeah.
size advantage in the middle of the floor. He could have gone to another turnaround or a hook in the middle of the floor, and he just sprayed it out instead. And I'm not trying to be too critical because over the years, I've rooted for a player in LeBron James who did the exact same thing, trusting Danielle Marshall, trusting
Mhm.
Kyle Korver, whoever it was. But like, there is a certain amount of like when you're dealing with these star archetypes, the Jokic, LeBron types, they're the make the right play guys, and there'll be moments at the end of games where you're like, you got to shoot the ball. But then with the
Right.
Kobe, Kevin Durant, Michael Jordan types, there'll be times where it's like, bro, you got three dudes on you. You got to trust your teammates. And that's kind of just like the
For
give and
sure.
take of those different archetypes of players.
Yeah, that's sort of the inherent challenge of
Yep,
the sport a
exactly.
little bit. A couple more questions, then we'll go over to playback. If OKC loses in Game 7, if OKC now that would be a second round exit, back to a second round exit in back to back years, with their only series wins coming against an injured Pelicans team and then the Grizzlies this year. Does that say anything greater about the Thunder and their flaws, or is it just they ran into two tough matchups in back to back seasons?
I think it's just the simple fact that every single player in the rotation, other than Alex Caruso, is 26 or younger. Like, there is a real youth and inexperience problem with Oklahoma City. And frankly, we've never seen a team this young have championship level success in the NBA. It has literally never happened. Like that's my thing. Like when the way that Oklahoma City was discussed during the regular season, I I viewed them as a legitimate championship threat. I ranked them second. But NBA history tells us that teams like this don't win now. They win like 2 or 3 years from now when they have lost a bunch of times and as a result of that have made these like seemingly minuscule improvements but in a way that manifests specifically in the playoff setting. They basically get better at getting their regular season success to translate to the postseason because they've just been there so many times. They're just so comfortable. And I just can't tell you how many times in my life I've seen playoff series where the older, more experienced team just looks more comfortable than the younger, inexperienced team. It is not a hard or fast rule. There are teams that buck that trend. But the whole thing is like if Oklahoma City wins game 7 and then they beat Minnesota and then they beat whoever comes out of the East, they are breaking a trend. They are breaking a historical NBA trend, which is that super young teams don't win at this level. And frankly, Jackson, like I the reason the series is going 7 is the youth and inexperience of Oklahoma City. They are a better
Yeah.
basketball team than Denver. They
Yeah.
have controlled large portions of this series. But like I'm watching these dudes and I'm watching Jamal and I'm watching Aaron Gordon and I'm watching Jokic. These guys have been in wars over years. They have seen it all. And so there's just a level of comfortability that they have in these settings. And as far as the big picture goes for Oklahoma City, let's say they lose there's a certain conversation to have about like, okay, well, you have all this draft compensation. What are you going to do? Just keep drafting players and then letting them walk? Like, you got to do something with these picks. And, maybe that ends up being them trading for a big rangy wing, which is the kind of player they don't really have. They just don't have that like 6'8", Jaden McDaniels type of player. Maybe it is a super aggressive star trade sort of thing. But ultimately, what's going to put them over the top is their experience. It's going to be Shea having more games like tonight and fewer games like he's had the rest of this playoff run. It's going to be Chet going from a guy that like can completely disappear for large portions of the game to a guy that leverages his gifts for the entirety of the 42, 43 minutes that he's on the floor. That's what's going to put these guys over the top. I remember watching one of my favorite examples of this was the 2012 NBA Finals between the Thunder and the Heat, and there was a rebound on a missed free throw, a Heat free throw in Game 5 that Shane Battier came away with. And this was, if you remember that Thunder team, they were so athletic. And Shane, the old slow guy, beat everyone to the ball. And it's because like he just has been in so many games that he understands that that singular moment was just as important as every other possession in the game. And that if you engage and fight for every inch, you might gain 3 or 4 inches over the course of that game. That could be the difference between winning and losing, which could be the difference in the series. And you go back to that series, every fucking game was right down to the final possessions to like the KD near foul in game 2 to like game 3 and game 4 both came down to clutch situations. I even think back to LeBron and Paul Pierce going for a loose ball in the 2007 game 7 between the Cavs and the Celtics, where LeBron had 45 or whatever and Paul Pierce had 42 or whatever. Paul Pierce's old fat ass beat LeBron to the ball because he's just an old dude who just understands that every inch of the game is worth fighting for. And there are just so many missed opportunities with the Thunder, so many bad shots early in the clock, so many silly mistakes, just simply because they haven't understood through time and experience how valuable every possession is in a basketball game.
Yeah, I last year when the Celtics won it all, I looked this up because I was curious as a Celtics fan. How many teams in this century have won with their best player being 26 or younger? Not many. It's like Steph in that their first title year, Dwayne Wade, and then that's pretty much it because Kobe was not the best player on those early Lakers teams, right? And that's just for the best player. Never mind the rest of the roster. Both of those teams that had their best player 26 years old had multiple contributing vets. Jrue Holiday, Al Horford, Kristaps Porzingis in this last run. Andrew Bogut and Andre Iguodala
Sean Livingston, Leandro Barbosa.
Sean Livingston.
Yeah.
Right. Like it takes if you're never mind the whole construct of your team. If your best player is young, you're probably not going to win. And if your best player is young, you're going to need more than one rotation impactful vet most of the time.
Nope, I totally agree.
Let's do one more question and then we'll go over to playback. Sort of a more general question. What makes a player fun to watch for you?
You know, this is fascinating. I saw some people debating this on Twitter between Jason Tatum and Anthony Edwards and this concept of aura. And I do think that plays a big role with the casual fans. I think there's a aura, like a confidence, a bravado, a backing up of that confidence and bravado with your play. I think that there are certain players that fans act a certain way and they kind of see through it. You'll see that sometimes too in a negative way. I think that basketball players enjoy watching talented basketball players. Like, I don't think it's a coincidence that every time I talk to a basketball player, like a person who's played extensively in their life, they love Steph and they love LeBron. But then you talk to a casual fan and they love one guy, hate the next guy because it's all about aura. It's all about who they're rooting for. It's all about like these different things. I think that it kind of just depends on the kind of person you are. For me, I gravitate to like specific basketball traits. Like even with the guys that I don't necessarily like Joel Embiid, I'm impressed by his footwork. James Harden, I've literally stolen his footwork on step back threes. I use him all the time. A guy like with Embiid specifically too, he's got like really strong footwork on like his pivot moves on his turnarounds over both shoulders. There's like there's a certain element of like imitation is the sincerest form of flattery that you'll see with basketball players too. Like Shea is a player that one of the moves that he's been working on that he's been using a lot in the last couple of years that I've been working on a ton is that hesitation dribble where you kind of turn sideways and then you just kind of probe with a jab step and you just cover ground going back towards your left for a step back three. That's like a really fascinating basketball move that I think is really useful for a dribble drive guard just because he sells the left-handed drive with that move, and he'll drive out of that move a lot of times, but then he'll just pull back out of it with that step back. So for basketball players, I think they're attracted to like specific basketball skills and traits. I think for casual fans, it's a lot of aura, that kind of stuff. And then I think there's something to be said about just like must-see TV kinds of stuff. So for instance, like you want to know why Steph and LeBron have crazy amounts of fans? Because there's nothing like a Steph heater. When you watch a Steph heater, it is one of the most incredible bits of television you'll ever see. Older LeBron has been a tougher watch, but younger LeBron was like the most incredible freight train athlete you've ever seen. It was like if Zion took care of his body. Like it was literally insane. And so there's a certain like must-see TV element to it as well.